of detail. And I don't want to be kind of spending too much time, although some of the details are necessary. But one of the things that strikes me about it is that people say, in that TV show I talk about in Lifetime or whatever, Homeless to Harvard was that title. And maybe there was some similarities in that young woman's journey and so forth and so on. But from your point of view, it's always difficult for me to kind of use that word to describe what was going on in your life, like homeless, because, well, you did live somewhere, but it wasn't always the same place for 20 or 30 years as I have, for example, or other people. So the idea of a home is a much more difficult idea to get across to people. And what does it mean to be homeless? You know, we have these stereotypes in society. When someone says, oh, he or she is homeless, we have this category, this box into which we put people. So to me, it would have been a very difficult thing to have the title homeless, because immediately you're drawn to your own bias. But you may agree or disagree. But I want to spend a minute or two in the very beginning about your relationship with your mother. When I say your relationship, meaning the strength and what you learned from her and what she gave to you in terms of her love, and perhaps now, as a young adult, she's still maybe the most powerful person in your life. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Definitely one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful. I mean, she's the only person that I've known since I was born. So,
right.
I mean, I still talk to her, you know, every day, every other day. So.
Well, that's terrific, because in the book, again, from my reading of the book, there's so much that says to the reader that your journey was uncharted to a certain extent, like you were in Oregon and you moved someplace else and moved here and eventually moved to Boston and came to Massachusetts. You were in Quincy, you were in Hull, you were many different places. But the constant was the fact that your mother was taking you, bringing you there for you. And it may have seemed at times like, oh, what am I doing? But somehow it was a measure of love that's kind of almost beyond description. In the early part of the book, I'm talking too much, but in the early part of the book, you mention that people would so often, at an early age, and perhaps even now, what does your mother do? And how did you react to that kind of a question with, like, why are you asking that question?
I do want to address that question and how I would react when people asked it. And I also want to jump off of a few of the things that you said about my mom and just emphasize that I feel very lucky to have grown up with such a mom, and that a lot of people didn't always think she was the best mother, because she would put us in, I guess, situations of risk, being in a homeless shelter, going somewhere with no money and just taking off. She was very adventurous.
Risk-taking.
She would take risks, which I think a lot of people didn't think were really necessary, and you know, they were difficult for me as a child. I mean, it was hard for me to be moving around, instability. It was very emotional for me, but I think that something that kept me strong throughout all of this is that my mom always was there for me. I knew she would never leave me. I knew that she loved me. I knew that she wanted me to learn a lot, and she would never betray me. And so I think that really kept me strong, and that was the constant thread throughout my life, which I think a lot of kids growing up in homelessness don't have that strong adult figure in their life, and maybe why they weren't as lucky as I feel like I was, or I am. But yeah, the chapter that you asked about early in the book, called "What Does Your Mother Do?" Was something that was asked often of me when I was as young as in second grade. You know, what does your mother do? And I always felt like perplexed by that question, maybe even angered, because my mom was on welfare, and she did a lot of things. She liked to garden. She liked to read books, have intellectual conversations, walk. there was a lot of things that she was. I could tell you about the kind of person that she is, but that didn't seem to measure up to what society wanted to hear. Like, what does your mother do for a living? I mean, he can't just say she's on welfare. It's kind of, you lose your value as a person in some way. So that was a difficult question for me as a child. And in the chapter, I talk about kind of coming to terms with that and being like, I will tell you about my mom and who she is, and that I am proud of her, and I'm not going to feel ashamed by your question or evade it. Yeah.
I think that's important to have you say those things because, again, people so many times, even with myself, I'll be asked a question like, what do you do, Mike? People look at me. They know I'm involved in the church. And I say, well, I'm a deacon in the church. Then they continue to probe that question by saying, well, what do you do? It isn't enough to say who I am or what I am, or to know that I'm 5'10" and so forth and so on, or I'm so many years old. But what do you actually do? So Americans, I say Americans for the most part because that's all I know, but tend to put people into categories, as they were probably trying to do with you and your mother when they first met you. And to me, that's why I keep coming back to this. It was such an important chapter for me to see how it was for you as a child in elementary school, and still today talking about that and the embarrassment perhaps, or close to humiliation you must have felt. How do I tell people exactly what my mother is or is not without looking like a fool? So it's an important point.
Yeah, I never knew how to answer that, because sometimes she'd be in like a live-in housekeeper for a year, or she'd do odd jobs, but there was nothing I could really say, this is my mom, this is her career. And I think that's really great how you mentioned that people, judge by your profession and want to know what difference do you make based on your profession, because I'm a high school teacher, and I find that people make a lot of assumptions, good and bad, about that, and assume, wow, that's great, you're doing so much to help the world, and what a great profession. Or they may be thinking, that's great, but you don't make that much money, or it's like it is very much like your value is on what you choose to do for a profession, when that's not all that there is to people as people. I mean, it's very limiting, especially in our society, if you feel like you only have value if you're like a doctor or a lawyer or investment banker, and that other jobs are not worthwhile, or other pursuits or hobbies. Yeah.